Sienna Owens sank onto the sun-warmed bench at the edge of the pier, kicked off her worn flats, and sighed like the ocean wind had just stolen her last ounce of energy. 15 minutes, she whispered to herself, unwrapping the half-crushed sandwich from her tote. That's all I need to survive the rest of this day. She didn't notice the man who sat beside her until he cleared his throat, a low, polite sound that startled her just enough to drop her sandwich into her lap. "Sorry," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "Didn't mean to scare you." Sienna looked up, blinking at the stranger. He was dressed casually enough, plain t-shirt, jeans, dark sunglasses, but there was something too clean, too crisp about him. Like he didn't belong in the chaos of the city, let alone on this weathered pier she used to escape her cafe job for a few precious minutes each day. "It's fine," she muttered, brushing crumbs off her skirt. "I didn't expect company. This bench is usually the unpopular one." He smiled faintly. "I like the view." Sienna followed his gaze. Boats bobbed gently in the distance, seagulls circled overhead, and families ambled along the boardwalk behind them. Nothing special, really, but it was quiet, peaceful. "Same," she said, more to herself than to him. He turned to her. "Rough day?" Sienna gave a dry laugh. "You could say that. My coffee machine exploded at work. I got yelled at by a customer who thought almond milk was a conspiracy, and I just found out my rent's going up. Again." "Ouch," he said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "That's a lot." She glanced sideways at him. He didn't look like someone who'd ever worried about rent or coffee machines. His watch alone could probably cover her utilities for a year. Still, something about him didn't scream arrogance. He wasn't scrolling through a phone or acting like the world belonged to him. He was just there, listening. "I'm Sienna," she offered, not sure why she was telling him, but feeling like she should. He hesitated for a second. Dorian Steel," she raised an eyebrow. "That sounds important," he laughed, a warm, low sound. "It's just a name." But something in his voice made her wonder. They fell into a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Sienna leaned back, letting the salty wind tangle her hair, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time all day. "So, what brings you to my unpopular bench, Dorian Steel?" He stared out at the water for a moment before answering. "Needed air. I just came from a meeting where 6 grown adults argued for 30 minutes about the color of a conference room wall." She blinked. "You work in design," something like that. "Let me guess, corporate." He looked at her then, and his mouth curved into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Something like that too." Sienna tilted her head. "You're being very mysterious." "Would it ruin things if I said I kind of like that you don't know who I am?" She frowned. "Should I?" "Not at all," the way he said it. It wasn't cocky. If anything, he sounded like he genuinely hoped she didn't, like he was tired of people knowing. That made her curious, but not enough to press. She kind of liked not knowing too. Her phone buzzed in her tote. She groaned. "Break's over. Back to the almond milk conspiracy, back to real life," she said with a smile, standing and slipping her shoes on again. Dorian stood too, and for a second she thought he'd just nod and walk off. But instead he said, "Can I see you again?" Sienna blinked. "You want to? Have lunch or dinner or another 15 minutes on a bench, whatever you want." He wasn't smooth about it. He looked almost nervous, which made her smile widen. "I get 15 minutes here every day at 1, she said. "If you happen to be around the pier." "I'll be here," he said without hesitation. Sienna turned, walking back toward her job with a strange flutter in her chest. She didn't know that the man she'd just shared a sandwich-scented breeze with owned the tallest building in the city. Or that he'd just walked out of a boardroom where people called him Sir, and Mr. Steel, like his name, meant something sacred. She didn't know he'd flown in from Singapore that morning, that his driver was waiting in a black car just out of view, or that he usually didn't make a habit of sitting on public benches. And Dorian Steel, billionaire CEO of Steel International, didn't know why this girl in a waitress uniform with mustard on her skirt had just made him feel more alive than any deal he'd ever closed. But he did know one thing. He was coming back tomorrow. The next day, Sienna reached the bench 3 minutes late, breathless from dodging a street performer's juggling pins and nearly tripping over a toddler's scooter. She spotted him immediately. Dorian stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of a slate blue jacket, watching a pelican dive into the water like it held answers he needed. "You waited," she said, voice lighter than she expected it to be. "I said I would," he replied, eyes meeting hers. "Do you always run like someone's chasing you?" "Only when I'm trying to escape reality." He nodded, then gestured toward the bench. "Back to our kingdom of 15 minutes." Sienna dropped onto the worn wood and peeled the lid off a paper cup. "I brought real coffee today. I figured if you're joining me again, I should at least offer something that doesn't taste like despair." He accepted the second cup she handed him, sniffed it, and raised an eyebrow. "Hazelnut, don't judge it. It's the only flavor that makes me forget I'm serving people who think tipping $1 is generosity." He took a sip, then gave a short nod. "Not bad, you've redeemed hazelnut." They sat in silence for a beat. Not the awkward kind, more like the kind you settle into when the noise of everything else fades just enough. "So," she started, twisting the hem of her sleeve, "do you always spend your afternoons searching for benches that smell vaguely like fish, only when the company's worth it?" She laughed, caught off guard. "Do you say that to everyone who shares their coffee with you?" "No," the word hung there, quiet but loaded. "I don't usually do this either," she admitted. "Talk to strangers or give away my only caffeine source." Dorian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What made you break the rule?" "You didn't look like you needed anything from me." That made him pause. "I mean," she continued, "I serve people all day long. Everyone always wants something. You didn't. I'm not used to being seen that way." "Well, you give off mysterious loner vibes. But not the creepy kind, more like someone who's too used to being surrounded by noise and needs a little quiet for once." He turned toward her fully, expression unreadable. "You read people often?" "Only when they sit on my bench 2 days in a row." Dorian glanced down at his watch, then back at her. "How long do we have?" 7 minutes, she said, checking her phone with a sigh. "Then it's back to screaming toddlers and espresso shots." "I could pick you up after your shift," he said, voice low. "We could go somewhere, no fish smell, no clocks." Sienna blinked. "Like dinner, if you'll let me." She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because when something felt too easy, it usually meant there was a catch, and he was definitely not the kind of man who waited around for a second coffee in a paper cup. "I close at 6, she said finally. "If you're serious, I'll be outside." She studied him. His jaw was tight, like he wasn't used to asking twice, like he'd meant it the first time and wasn't going to try convincing her. "I'll be the one smelling like steamed milk and regret," she said, standing. He stood too. "I'll be the one in the car with 2 seats." She laughed under her breath, then walked away before she could change her mind or ask why her heart was thudding like she'd just outrun a city bus. Dorian watched her disappear into the crowd, then reached into his pocket and tapped a number on his phone. "Bring the car to the pier at 6 sharp, he said, "and have the chef prepare something light. Seafood, no wine." "Yes, Mr. Steel," came the voice on the other end. He hung up and sat again, alone now, the cup still warm in his hand. It had been a long time since someone looked at him like a person instead of a name on a building. And even longer since someone made him forget about meetings, markets, and mergers with a single glance. He would be waiting at 6, and this time he wasn't letting it be just 15 minutes. When Sienna stepped out of the cafe at 6:05, she nearly turned back around. A sleek, obsidian black vehicle was parked at the curb. It wasn't just expensive, it was the kind of car that didn't belong on a street where gum stuck to your shoes if you stood too long. And Dorian was leaning against it, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching her like she was the only thing on the street worth seeing. "You weren't kidding," she said as she approached. "That's not just a car, that's a spaceship with wheels." He opened the passenger door. "Then let's take off." Inside, it smelled like cedar wood and something faintly citrus. The seat adjusted as she sat, like it recognized her. She tried not to gape. "Is this leather?" she asked, touching the armrest. "Vegetable tanned," he said, sliding behind the wheel. "I had the interior customized." "Of course you did," she muttered, buckling her seatbelt. They pulled away from the curb. The silence between them wasn't strained, but it was heavy with the awareness that this was no longer a bench and a paper cup. This was something else. "Where are we going?" she asked, watching the city blur past. "I thought we'd start with the rooftop." "Of what?" He didn't answer. She expected a restaurant, maybe a sleek, modern place tucked inside a luxury hotel. What she didn't expect was when the car pulled into a private garage beneath a high rise in the financial district. The elevator they stepped into required a key card, which Dorian slid into a panel without a word. When the doors opened, her breath caught. The rooftop wasn't just a space, it was a full garden. String lights hung between metal beams, casting a soft glow over trimmed hedges, low couches, and a long table set for two. A breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of lemon blossoms. She turned to him. "You live here?" "I own the building," he said simply, then added, "But no, I don't live here, not anymore." She walked forward slowly, her shoes crunching lightly over crushed gravel. "This feels like something out of a dream." "I don't sleep much," he said, stepping beside her. "But if I did, I'd want it to feel like this." A man in a crisp white shirt appeared from the far end of the terrace and silently poured still water into the glasses on the table before disappearing again. "So," she said as they sat, "you're not exactly a guy who just wanders onto piers for casual bench chats, are you?" "No," he said, "but I wasn't lying when I said I needed air." She traced the edge of her glass. "You could have gone anywhere, why there?" "Because it was quiet," he said. "And because you were there." The admission landed with more weight than she expected. She searched his face, looking for the catch, the performance, but there was nothing calculated in his expression. "You don't talk like someone who's used to being turned down," she said. "I'm not." That surprised her. "So why take the risk?" "Because I haven't wanted something real in a long time, and you didn't look at me like I was a name on a building." She froze. "You knew I didn't recognize you?" "I hoped." "Why?" "Because if you knew who I was, you might have smiled for the wrong reason." She rested her elbows on the table, leaning in. "What exactly do you think I'd do if I knew? Not tell me the truth, not challenge me. Not make me laugh at the way you did when you said steamed milk and regret." Her lips twitched. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you've said." The food arrived: grilled scallops, roasted vegetables, some kind of citrus glaze that made the air taste brighter. She didn't ask how it was all ready. She didn't want to know. The mystery was part of the magic. They ate slowly, the conversation drifting from childhood dreams to favorite movies. He told her he once tried to run away from boarding school and made it 6 miles before a hotel concierge recognized him and called security. She told him about the time she accidentally set off the fire alarm at her high school dance because she leaned against a wall that wasn't actually a wall. By the time dessert arrived, something with honey and sea salt and whipped cream clouds, she'd almost forgotten who he was, and that was the most dangerous part. "You said you don't live here anymore," she said, watching him closely. "So where do you live?" "Nowhere permanent," he said. "I keep a few places, London, Tokyo, but I haven't stayed anywhere more than a week in over a year." She stared at him. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." "Then why do it?" He hesitated. "Because if I stop moving, I have to admit I'm not running toward anything." "I'm just running." She leaned back in her chair. "That's a lot for someone who gives off iceberg vibes." He laughed quietly. "I didn't expect to say that out loud tonight." "Good," she said. "That means you're not just trying to impress me." He tilted his head. "Am I? If you were, you'd have picked a more obvious location. A trendy bar, a skyline view restaurant with overpriced cocktails." "I thought about it," he admitted. "But then I remembered how you looked when you sat on that bench. Like you just needed a place to breathe." Sienna looked past the lights, toward the faint outline of the bay in the distance. "I don't know what this is," she said softly. "But I don't want it to be something I look back on and wonder if it was ever real." He reached across the table, not grabbing her hand, just close enough that she could if she wanted to. "Then don't wonder," he said. "Let me show you it is." She didn't take his hand, not yet. But she didn't pull away either. And for the first time in a very long while, Sienna didn't feel like she was surviving her day. She felt like she was living it. Sienna didn't realize how quiet her apartment was until she walked in that night. Heels in one hand, her thoughts still tangled with the memory of citrus blossoms and the way Dorian had looked at her like she was the only thing anchoring him to the present. She dropped her keys into the chipped ceramic bowl by the door and stood for a moment, staring at the half-finished canvas on the easel by the window. She hadn't painted in months, not since her dad's health took a turn and she'd picked up double shifts to cover the bills. But tonight, her fingers itched for color again. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but the name Anya flashed across the screen. "You're alive," her best friend announced. "I thought you'd been abducted by a handsome stranger." Sienna leaned against the kitchen counter. "Something like that? You're joking." "I had dinner on a rooftop," Anya gasped. "With who? Wait, was it him? The guy from the pier?" Sienna closed her eyes. "Yes, you said he was just a normal guy." "I was wrong. Define not normal." Sienna hesitated. "He owns the building we ate on top of." There was a beat of stunned silence. "You're dating Batman." "I'm not dating anyone." "You had dinner on a private roof and you're not dating." "I've had boyfriends who didn't even own working microwaves." Sienna laughed, but it faded quickly. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I don't belong in his world." Anya's voice softened. "Maybe he doesn't belong in it either." Sienna didn't respond. The next afternoon, Dorian was already sitting on the bench when she arrived. He didn't speak right away, just stood and held out a small white box tied with a navy ribbon. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "A favor," he said. "One I owe you." Inside was a tiny silver key attached to a delicate chain. "I've been thinking about your art," he said before she could ask. "You said you stopped painting. I found a space near the marina. Quiet, natural light. It's yours if you want it." She stared at him. "You rented me a studio?" "No, I bought it." She blinked, stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because I want to see what you create when no one's asking you to be anyone but yourself." She closed the box carefully. "You don't even know what I paint." "I don't have to," he said. "I see the way your eyes look past the world like there's something more vivid just behind it." She leaned back, overwhelmed, heart pounding. "You can't just fix things for me." "I don't want to fix anything," he said. "I just want to give you room to breathe." Sienna looked at him, then really looked. His jaw was tighter than usual, his posture too careful, like he was waiting for her to push him away. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could have anyone." He leaned forward. "Because I'm not interested in anyone who expects me to be a perfect version of what they imagine. You never asked for anything, you never tried to impress me, and I've never wanted someone more." Her throat tightened. "I don't know how to exist in your world." "Then don't," he said. "Let me exist in yours." That night, she unlocked the studio door. The air smelled faintly of pine from the old floorboards. Sunlight filtered through a high window, casting golden shapes across the raw canvas resting against the wall. She dipped a brush into red paint and dragged it across the surface without hesitation. Later that week, Dorian stood at her side as she placed the last stroke on her first finished piece in months. "You're not what I expected," she said softly, not looking at him. "Neither are you." She turned. "I spent so long trying to survive, I never thought I'd find something or someone who made me want more." He reached for her hand carefully, like she was porcelain and fire at once. "Then let's have more." They didn't need a rooftop or a garden to make it real. He kissed her in the studio, surrounded by the scent of paint and cedar, with the city breathing quietly outside. The next Saturday, she returned to the bench, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her old life hadn't vanished, it was still there, the noise, the bills, the routine, but it was no longer all-consuming. Dorian sat beside her, dressed in a navy t-shirt and jeans, no driver in sight. "You know," she said, sipping her coffee, "I think we've officially ruined this bench for anyone else." He smiled. "I hope so." She leaned her head on his shoulder and looked out at the water. She'd taken a break that day weeks ago, expecting nothing. She'd found everything. Sienna stood in the gallery's back corridor, hands clasped tightly in front of her, heart battering her ribs like it was trying to escape. Through the open archway, the buzz of conversation swelled low murmurs punctuated by the clink of glasses and the rustle of expensive fabric. The space was aglow with soft amber lighting, casting long shadows on the pristine white walls that now bore her name. She hadn't wanted this, At least not like this. The attention, the press shots, the hovering collectors. But Dorian had insisted no, not insisted. He had believed. Believed in her work when she hadn't. Believed in what it could say when she'd forgotten how to speak through paint. Still breathing? He asked gently, appearing at her side with the quiet confidence of a man who'd stood in 1,000 rooms like this, but only ever looked for one face. Barely, she whispered. I feel like a fraud. He tilted his head slightly. Why? Because people are finally seeing what I've seen since the first time I watched you hold a brush. Because I'm not used to being looked at like I matter. You're not being looked at, he said. You're being seen. She let out a shaky breath. You make it sound so simple. It is. The world just complicates it. She turned to him, eyes narrowing slightly. How are you still standing here with me when you could be out there charming every investor in the room? He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. Because they don't matter. This does. A man in a tailored brown suit approached with a nod, clearly waiting to speak to Dorian. Sienna gave him a small nod and slipped away into the gallery space, needing a moment of air that wasn't thick with expectation. She found herself in front of the final piece in the exhibit, a large canvas she'd painted in a single night, not long after the studio key had been placed in her hand. It was abstract violent reds slashed through with arcs of shadowed blue, but somehow it felt more honest than anything she'd ever painted. People keep gathering around this one, a soft voice said beside her. She looked to her left and found a woman with short silver hair and sharp eyes standing there, a champagne flute dangling from her fingers. It's raw, the woman continued, unapologetic, but there's something beneath it, a kind of vulnerability you can't fake. Sienna hesitated. That's a generous interpretation. The woman glanced at her. I don't do generous, I do accurate. I run the Lumiere Foundation. We sponsor emerging artists with international residencies. I'd like to talk more if you're interested. Sienna blinked. You want to sponsor me? I want to invest in you. There's a difference. Before she could respond, Dorian appeared again, his gaze flicking between the two women. The foundation director gave him a nod of recognition, then handed Sienna a slim white card. I'll be in the city for 2 more days. Think about it. She walked away without waiting for a reply. Sienna stared at the card for a long moment. Dorian didn't speak. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she murmured. You don't have to decide tonight, he said, or even this year. You've already made the biggest leap. What leap? Believing your voice has value. She turned toward him, something soft and terrified flickering behind her eyes. What if I lose it again? You won't, he said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. But even if you do, I'll be right here. Reminding you, her throat tightened. I never thought I'd be here, not with you, not with any of this. I didn't either, he admitted. But I don't want to imagine anything else now. They moved through the rest of the evening together, drifting between guests and glasses of wine, but always returning to each other as though tethered by something invisible and unbreakable. Later, as the gallery emptied and the staff began clearing glasses, Sienna stood beside him near the tall windows, watching the city pulse below. I think I'm falling in love with you, she said, voice barely above a breath. He turned, eyes steady. You're not the only one, she smiled, eyes glistening. You didn't even flinch. I've been in boardrooms with billion-dollar mergers and walked out feeling nothing. Tonight, watching you stand in front of your own work, that's the only thing that's made me feel like I've won something real. She touched his chest lightly, right over his heart. You scare me sometimes. Why? Because you make me want more. And I've spent a long time settling. Then let's stop settling, he said, together. Months passed. The studio near the marina became her sanctuary. The gallery show turned into a residency in Florence where she painted landscapes that bled with color and light. Dorian flew in to see her every 2 weeks, never staying long, but always arriving like he couldn't stay away a moment longer. One evening, while walking through the quiet garden of the estate she was staying in, he stopped her beneath a pergola strung with olive branches. I have a question, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. She blinked, heart leaping. If you pull out a diamond the size of a peach pit, I swear. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper instead. She frowned, unfolding it. Inside was a child's sketch, a crude drawing of the two of them holding hands, with a very crooked heart scribbled in red crayon between them. She looked up, confused. "I drew that when I was 7, he said. "First time I saw a girl crying in the schoolyard and didn't know how to fix it. I drew her a picture, she didn't keep it." She stared at him, eyes wide. "I never stopped wanting to give someone something that made them feel better," he said. "This time I found the right person." She folded the paper carefully, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Marry me, Sienna." She didn't speak, just nodded once and pulled him into a kiss that said everything words never could. A year later, their wedding took place in the same garden in Florence, under the same olive branches. The ceremony was small, just those who mattered, no press, no spectacle. Her dress was simple. His vows were not. He promised her a life of quiet mornings, of paint-stained hands and sunlit rooms. She promised him a love that asked for nothing but gave everything. When they danced that night, the music was soft, the stars were bold, and the world outside of them ceased to matter. They didn't need 15 minutes anymore, they had forever.